I'd love to hear a little bit more about y'all's background because I think it's important. Sure, we could read the invite, but I think it's helpful. So if y'all wouldn't mind just giving me a little bit more of your background, brag on it. You're in a room full of your peers, and also tell me your go-to karaoke song if you were karaokeing in this room, this very room right now. And why is it Seal's Kiss from a Rose? That's the real question.
I mean, I was actually going to go with Mariah Carey, You'll Always Be My Baby. I don't know why it's the first song that popped into my head, but it is.
A lot of affection for this room.
That's not an easy song to sing.
No, it's not. But I'm happy to kick off. So thank you to Trane Technologies for hosting this conversation today. It's always exciting to be at Climate Week and have systems level discussion about how to advance this work. But I am the Senior Director of ESG at Neiman Marcus Group. I have worked in sustainability for a long time. I started my career on the public policy side in Brussels, Belgium, managing the Fulbright program for the U.S. Embassy there, and realized that I really wanted a career that was dedicated to impact, but that I could do more with private sector resources. And so went back and got a Master of International Business at Tufts University and pivoted and really got to understand how investors were grading companies' performance in this space. So I spent some time working at Breckenridge Capital Advisors, which is a United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment signatory, and really got a deep understanding of what tools investors were using to grade companies' performance in this space. Then left there and went into investor relations and sustainability at Yum Brands, which is the parent company for KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell, and soon pivoted into Kentucky Bourbon, where I approached sustainability as a registered lobbyist. In the bourbon industry, they definitely view sustainable performance as a way to ask for new privileges and prevent additional regulation. At that point, I realized the future of sustainability belonged and rested in supply chain management. So I spent some time at JCPenney in their supply chain team, working with private label factories across Asia and Africa, helping them reduce their environmental footprint. And now I get to combine all of those different stakeholder management skills in my role at Neiman Marcus Group. So excited to share more about what we're doing today.
Amazing.
Great. Yeah, and I want to come tour your project.
Yeah, absolutely.
On an upcoming trip. My name is Lisa Jacobson. I'm president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and I'm here with my colleague, Laura Tierney, who's vice president of international programs for the council. We are a broad-based clean energy and energy efficiency trade association. We're based in Washington, D.C. We were formed to kind of be on the front lines from an industry perspective of the energy transition. We are energy efficiency companies, we're renewable energy companies, we're natural gas industries, we're storage, deep decarbonization technologies, all coming together to reduce emissions, improve the resilience and security of our energy system, and most importantly, make communities and businesses their energy management easier, and hopefully saving money and creating jobs along the way. So we work a lot on federal policy specifically, but one area that we've had a really close relationship with Trane on since our founding over 30 years ago is in the international climate change arena. Trane was one of our founding members, and in the early years, we participated in the Rio Earth Summit, and as I'm sure some of you know, Trane is really a leader in two of those big global environmental treaties that came out of it, and we work with them on the Framework Convention on Climate Change and all the subsequent treaties that have been put forward since then. But obviously, Montreal Protocol has been a huge area for Trane, and we learn a lot. We're here this week to really show what technology can do, but we're very focused on action and urgency, because we have a lot to do in a very short period of time. And it's inspiring being here and first of all, it's an amazing space. I really like what you've done with the video displays. It was very easy to understand what you're doing, and it was well presented. But these are really cutting edge case studies, so it's exciting to see it. So thanks for having me.
As you can tell, we've got a pretty slouched panel over here.
Yeah.
Some dead weight over here, a lot of good people. All right, so we're going to keep this pretty positive. I want it to be focused on solutions. We kind of talked about that. There's a lot of doom and gloom around Climate Week, and a lot less talk about solutions and what we can do, and also triumphs and things that we should be celebrating. But I am going to come in hot with one particular question, because it seemed to be something that was a big deal when we were exploring what we wanted to bring to this event. So Since y'all are both coming from kind of different perspectives a little bit in applications, what do you feel are the biggest challenges to decarbonizing the built environment? You want to go? Lisa can go. Allie can go.
I'll start. Maybe we can just.
I'm a bad
build off
moderator.
each
I'm like,
other.
whomever. Anybody in the audience?
Because
Whatever.
you just experienced a major project, so I'd be curious what you would say. I mean, from where I sit, which tends to be both a window in to implementation from the commercial side across many different industries, but also a policymaker lens, it really is the disaggregated decision making. Thinking about all the steps it takes for even someone who's really motivated, and someone could be, someone renting an apartment, someone in a stand-alone home, someone in a business, someone at a municipal level, or even someone at a state or federal level to take actions. It's just not easy.
Right.
And then we're innovating, which is amazing and what we need to do, but that also then makes the learning curve like 1 or 2 steps harder. So I think anything we can do to simplify the services that any customer would want. So it's information, it's customer service, and then communicating that to other decision makers. That would really help us accelerate, because right now I think that's a big barrier. I think we have many technologies and we can innovate, and we are, and we have ones that we'll need for the future, but right now it's just getting the stuff that we know really deployed at scale, and I think it's just complicated still.
And to build on that thread and speak at a tactical level about our partnership with Trane, at Neiman Marcus Group, we use 4 key strategies to decarbonize our built environment. We rely on energy efficiency, renewable electricity, electrification, and refrigerant management. And we all know that the energy efficiency and renewable electricity options are becoming more accessible, more affordable, more cost competitive. I think the cost of electrification is still one of our biggest barriers to accelerating decarbonization in the built environment. In certain markets across the US, there is ambitious regulation in place that can help make electrification a necessary and logical next step for a company like ours. Hi, Kristy. That's certainly the case in a city like New York City, where local law 97 places a lot of pressure on companies to upkeep their buildings. And so the project that you were referring to, Lisa, where we replaced 2 natural gas-powered chillers with electric options at our historic Bergdorf Goodman building along Fifth Avenue is a great example. And so I think the challenge is that in a lot of markets that regulation still doesn't exist to make it cost competitive or logical. And so in those cases, companies have to be really intentional about building electrification projects into their core company processes, whether that's your enterprise risk management process, your strategic planning, your capital budgeting. And it just involves training and engaging with your finance, your legal, your audit team in a new and different way. So talking about dispersed decision making and communication, I think, is definitely part of that challenge.
Well, can we take that a little bit further? Because Neiman Marcus Group's 2025 and 2030, gosh, doesn't it feel crazy to say 2030 right now? I feel like I'm in a time machine. But the goals are really ambitious. And so I'd love to know, you talked about being intentional with making those decisions. And people kind of throw that around. I'm not saying you are, but we hear it all the time, like intentional and authentic. What did that look like for y'all? Like, what did you do? What were some of the strategies? How did you engage stakeholders like customers and board members and all the folks who actually make like a huge difference in you making those decisions, but also listening to what they're wanting to see and it's important to them?
Absolutely. The process is really important. So our ESG strategy includes 2 goals. The first is to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions 50% by 2025, and the other one is to procure 100% renewable electricity by the year 2030. We actually just announced that we're going to validate that 2030 target with the Science Based Targets Initiative and add more credibility to our journey. And I think it all started with a materiality assessment. So the first thing you have to do is make sure that you understand, does climate have a material impact on my business? What are key stakeholders saying? So we did our first materiality assessment, and climate did emerge as an important issue for our company. And so measurement. It sounds trite, is always the first step. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so we worked with a CDP accredited solutions provider, Ontea Group, to really measure our emissions and found that the majority, not surprising, were coming from scope 2. And so we could decarbonize our operations rapidly if we were to rely on renewable electricity. So the second thing we then did after measuring was benchmarking with peers, looking at how they were setting goals around things like renewable electricity. And we discovered RE100 and realized that partnering with a coalition like that could really add credibility to the commitments that we were making, but also put us in a network of peers who could really help us advance the affordability and accessibility of that. And I think lastly, we really developed an intentional abatement plan early on with Trane Technologies that helped us get the buy-in of leadership. A lot of companies, leaders today, sustainability teams often put a lot of pressure on leaders to set these big, bold, ambitious goals without knowing all the technologies that are going to be required to get there. And we have a very conservative leadership team who wanted to understand what are the specific actions we're going to take across those 4 strategies I mentioned and how much is it going to cost. And so we partnered very closely with the Trane Technologies team to develop that abatement plan. And I think it really helped us get buy-in from leadership to do that work.
Amazing. Kristy, I'm giving you a chance to catch your breath, sis, because if it was me, I'd be like just already struggling to sit in this chair. So I'm going to ask Lisa a quick question and then we're going to pass it on to you. Lisa, so around kind of what Ali talked about, policy, again, obviously. I'm just going to keep going. Lisa, policy. But it's really important, especially when we have like the Inflation Reduction Act and we've got all these SEC regulations. How does policy, especially now, both help or hinder organizations being able to set these ambitious goals and act on them, which is, setting is one thing and then actually doing something about it is the most important thing. So,
well, I think there's probably more than 2, but I'll start with kind of 2 rules of thumb that don't conflict with each other, but I think are critical. From a decarbonization and especially an industry standpoint, the message has always been set clear rules and kind of get out of the way. Like, let us work with our customers, find the best solutions, but we're ready to move on, policy goals that are, very ambitious, that meet the test of science. Like, that is not what is the challenge. The challenge is the flexibility to get it done, right? So I think policy is critical, and clearly, New York City, but we could go through a long list of cities and states and our own national government that have set very important policies that are the kind of the rules of the road right now. We've gotten very strong market signals, and the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level, that was like 20 years in the making. We've never had a 10-year set of policies, especially in the tax code, like we have, and we don't really know what it will do. We're implementing it now, and so that's the second part, right? The details do matter, though, because you can set a policy, and if you get the frameworks underpinning it wrong, it can be very expensive for customers. It could distract from the overall goal. So it really is important for engagement beyond just kind of enacting the policy. And you mentioned the SEC. Well, the big news this week is obviously California. And there are a lot of questions about how they're going to implement their climate disclosure and climate, reporting requirements. So here we have a situation where for a couple of, well, at least 2 years, many were really focused on the SEC, and then we have the state of California, passing a law. I don't know if Governor Newsom signed it yet, but I think is expected to, which kind of, just puts us in a whole other plane on a lot of really important topics. But what will matter is how they implement it. We were having a conversation just before the panel. It's like, okay, well, what frameworks did they point to in the legislation? And they may have, but I'm not aware of which ones they did. But I have a feeling in their rulemaking process, which could take a year, it's a quick timeline for enactment, but that process is going to be really important for all of us to watch because it's going to impact a lot of decision making, and it's going to cover not just businesses that are in California, but those that do significant business in California.
Sure.
So this is a market maker moment.
Has a huge ripple effect,
right.
For sure.
That's what I was going to say. For the people in the room, do we want to define what's in the California bill so they know what development we're talking about? Yeah, sure. So there's 2 bills that just passed in California that are awaiting the governor's signature, and so they really apply to all private and public entities. So that's the big differentiator. This isn't just about public company disclosure anymore. of companies doing business in the state of California, over $500 million in revenue. They require the companies to disclose all scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, get those assured by a third-party entity, and disclose the financial costs associated with climate risks that the company is facing. So those 3 things are really going to move the needle when we think about, disclosure in this space.
All right, Kristy, now I'm on to you, because it's a nice segue. Lisa mentioned sort of like impact to consumer, like a ripple effect of both policy and what organizations are doing, and could create something that's more expensive or cumbersome for consumers. And we know that through data, especially if you look at different generations, consumer trust in the age of greenwashing is at best extremely confusing and confused, and at worst at an all-time low, especially when we look at Gen Z and younger. So how do organizations, you being an epic storyteller and also someone who founded Green Jobs Board, how do they tell resonant stories to different audiences, because you have to use a different lexicon based upon who you're trying to talk to, about their sustainability goals, but while also being authentic, like not necessarily greenwashing, using data-backed goals, but being authentic about what they're actually doing?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm,
this is Kristy.
I made it. I'm Kristy Drutman. I'm the founder of Brown Girl Green and the co-CEO of Green Jobs Board. We are a climate tech recruitment company focused on getting more people into climate work. And a lot of my work surrounds storytelling in the climate space, especially like thinking about corporate storytelling. I've worked with a lot of different corporations who want to do better and tell better stories about their ESG reporting or their corporate social responsibility goals, and always tell them, but where's the data? Where's the numbers? Where are the reports? Because if I'm going to put this out on the internet, I'm not about to get canceled if you don't have your info backed up. So I'm going to ask them the hard questions. I'm going to say, if you say you're going to do these certain things about like your water and your electricity usage by 2030, who on your team is actually accountable to making that happen? And I like talking about like where are the educational pieces, where is the accountability pieces that exist within the internal teams in these companies. Because for me, and they're always shocked by this because I think they don't realize I have a degree in environmental policy. Sometimes when people look at content creators, especially in the sustainability space, they might just say, you'll just sell a product for us. But they don't realize, I also have the academic and climate science background, so I'm
you're researching it, you're making sure that...
And I ask them the hard questions, and they're like, oh, no other influencer or content creator is asking us this. We just thought we could just post this. And I'm like, not me. I'm going to ask you the hard questions. And so I'd say for me, intentional storytelling, when I decide to partner with a company, I think for me, I decide that it's not greenwashing if I've actually seen some of those internal processes happening, especially if a company admits that they're not perfect and not just saying, oh, we've already achieved carbon neutrality and we're there. It's no, talk about the gaps, talk about the barriers, and make that very transparent. I think especially for Gen Z and younger people, they actually like the authenticity. And I think for some companies, they view that as a risk, right? Yeah. To their investors or, the people that they think they'll get a better ROI on. But if you care about consumers, you care about who's purchasing your products and all these things, I think transparency actually is going to make you stand out more as a brand and a company. I think taking those risks can lead to rewards when you're trying to build stronger leadership teams, trying to build better employee morale. And I think for those of us who are content creators or storytellers who maybe want to share those initiatives, I think that would make me a lot more comfortable and confident that what I'm sharing about said company is legitimate, Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to share that as a starting point. And I would say the other piece is try to find moments of that relatability. I think with Green Jobs Board, why it's been such a success is because maybe we will have certain positions in climate tech that people have never heard of, or a lot of these companies are startups that you've never heard of with interesting names. And you're just basically trying to sort through the storm of information to understand who's a company I should apply to. And I think Green Jobs Board cuts out that middleman and says, these are companies that we have had conversations with. They believe in the vision to bring more diverse people into the room, into their staffs, into their talent folds. And we're creating avenues of exposure for them because we're saying, you know, we've talked about doing even storytelling series. Like I've actually talked to a solar company where I was like, oh, can I tour your facility and actually talk about your manufacturing processes? Right. I've talked to other companies about doing, you know, live streams, just educating young people about how can you get a job and build a career in this space. And I think those avenues of transparency and information make you a more attractive employer and makes your company look like you care about the next generation in a meaningful way because you're building the infrastructure, the storytelling, and the resources to make that possible.
Amen. Here we go. Just snaps and everything. Because we have also attitudinal data that shows that, especially younger generations, they like the imperfection. They're not looking to companies to be this kind of big leviathan that we never have a touch point with. They actually want to feel like there's a humanness to it. And so storytelling brings that to life, which is really important. Of that vein, I want to get an example from each of you of an example of really good storytelling on a corporate level. It can be to any kind of audience. It could be to older, younger, any type of demographic, but about an ESG initiative that you think was really resonant and important. Allie's already raring to go. She's half out the
I'm
seat,
like
for
asking
heaven's sake.
Sarah, I hope you all go look out there. We have an amazing video that Trane so graciously put together for us about the electrification project at Bergdorf Goodman and why it was such an important moment for New York City. It was a very operational change out. I mean, you were removing 2 natural gas powered chillers and installing these 2 500-ton electric ones. But we made it a moment. We wrapped them in lavender, shut down 5th Avenue and 58th Street, hoisted them up into the air with the American flag. We had a female lead engineer on site with Trane wearing a lavender Bergdorf Goodman hard hat. And we created a video about the partnership and talked to people about what it means to electrify a building, transition it to renewable electricity, and drive those emissions down to zero because of legislation like Local Law 97. So I think that's our own personal story, and we're so grateful to the Trane team for influencing and helping us see why that type of content creation is important. But I also think that from another company example, hopefully everyone's seen Apple's new environmental status update floating around the internet.
You have not yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some imperfections, and we can talk about those too, but I think it's a great example of a company being bold and trying to speak to people differently about their environmental updates. So that would be my other example.
That's a good one. Lisa.
Well, I might take it in a different angle, maybe not as trendy, but still good. I mean, I think a lot of the videos and the work that's done in schools is really helpful. I mean, so right now we're in multiple phases of improving the sustainability of school buses and bus transportation. So there's a big grant program that's available to states and then ultimately going to school districts to electrify school buses. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some really cool videos related to that. And then, so they're not just, produced by, let's say, the Department of Energy or a school district. They're shared at the school, and they make really, they try to invite the PTA. They make it a really big deal.
Is it geared toward like administrators and people who
well,
have that
it's geared
kind of
towards the
buy-in,
students. I mean, for me, that's the power. I mean, yes, we want the the building engineers and others, or who fleet management for the school district to be aware and take advantage of these grants. But I think it's the educational moment for school kids. I mean. And because it's a complete story. So, I mean, I could go into it in more detail, but I mean, I just think anytime we can make these technologies really visible to people and how it's improving their lives, it's hard because a lot of technology we're kind of purposefully do not want to see, right?
Sure.
So what you did is great. You really just kind of full on embrace of it.
Maybe
you can't
do,
see it, and if we're doing our job well, it's complete, your space is, perfectly conditioned and you wouldn't even notice, right? So that's the North Star. So I think we have to kind of make it visible to people, and I think some of this storytelling as it relates to electric school buses has been really strong, and it gets younger people to think about it.
When you're pointing to it doesn't always have to be like sexy Coppola-esque storytelling, right? Like really glossy videos, and it doesn't have to be this kind of. It's just something that demystifies sustainability or certain practices a little bit and puts it in front of people that can do the job, especially if that's your intended audience. I like it. We're all riding back in a school bus after this.
I just want to shout out the initiative Clean Path New York. I've done a long-term content collaboration partnership with them over the past year or so, educating especially young people about what New York is planning on doing about building, renewable energy all the way from upstate all the way here to, build more equitable energy access all throughout New York City, and it's been really cool to work with them to experiment with storytelling. They hired a content person specifically to work with influencers and content creators to tell that story, and I think that's really interesting because they come from more of a I guess you could say a corporate background and more focus in policy and all of these spaces, but they realized there was a huge gap in need to do better storytelling to reach the public and the masses to understand how this project could actually benefit their communities here. And so I did a few kind of on the street interviews with them, with their team, interviewed them about just kind of humanizing what is the vision of this project, talking to them about what is the job creation prospect of Clean Path, talking about how is this going to improve communities. And I think that felt really authentic because it was coming directly from a wide array of their staff members, sharing those key data points, but in a way that felt, more relatable, because it's me as a young person living here, it's why should I care about this kind of project? And it's just straight up asking about that, right? Yeah. Instead of just seeing shiny billboards, it's I think content creation and making social media videos provides you an opportunity to humanize some of these technologies, to make it seem that it, and to show that it is community driven, it is community oriented, if that is what you're saying your technology is doing. So I think Clean Path New York, I'd highly recommend people check it out, is doing really great storytelling around that.
And I love that you point out too, especially I hate to harp on Gen Z, but it's such a high touch, instant response generation. You guys are much more used to, you didn't have to wait for America Online to dial up and stuff like that. Some of us still have PTSD from that, right, Sarah? So, all that stuff. So you talked about getting canceled too. If you post information that's the wrong kind of information, Isaiah's is oh my God, America Online, here we are. But you talk about being canceled, and that is something that Gen Z will give you automatic feedback on social, and I'm talking about you as a company. You will hear the discontent, and you also hear those really frank, kind of not finessed questions of, cool, but what are you doing? And that's, I think, really interesting. Have you guys experienced that through social channels or through responses to ESG reports or to the work that you do from, maybe not necessarily Gen Z, but just from consumers? You're hearing from consumers, and they're giving you immediate feedback on how you're communicating sustainability initiatives.
Yes, I mean, we have an educational project called the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book, and Trane Technologies has been also a supporter of that project from the beginning, and it's meant to be, basic facts about our energy system geared towards policymakers, and we have it commissioned by an independent analytic firm, Bloomberg NEF. So many of you are familiar, I'm sure, with Michael Bloomberg. So this is one of his companies that he acquired about 15 years ago to track what's going on in the energy transition. So we get a lot of comments on that. Mostly good, but of course people have questions. I mean, that's the whole point of putting the information out there. It's because people do not understand what's really happening, right? Mm-hmm. And so we try to put out many pertinent facts that are mostly real-time data on economics and technology deployment, and let people make their conclusions. So you get a lot of opinions, and I think it's eye-opening, and we welcome that. We want to improve every year. Yeah. So whether it be why didn't you cover this or that, or we don't, or just a random reaction, either praise or disdain, you'll hear it all. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're putting it out there to provoke and to encourage people to share with us. Yes.
You want that immediate
It's an educational tool.
I love it. Allie?
Agree. We're a relationship business at Neiman Marcus Group, and so ways that we collect customer feedback, for instance, is including the voice of the current and the future customer in our materiality assessment that helps dictate our strategy and our focus areas. But we don't just do it once every few years. We maintain that relationship on an ongoing basis. So a few examples of what that looks like for us is showing up to Sustainable Fashion Forum each year. It's founded by a woman of color. There's a large young audience. It's really important to us to get diverse perspectives on our programming, not just one. And so we show up up and we have real intimate panels with these customers and ask them for feedback on what's working well, where are we maybe misstepping. And so that does inform a lot of the work that we then do on our websites, for instance, with things like fashion for change or conscious curation, which help customers filter through products based on the values that matter to them, whether that's sustainable materials, responsible manufacturing practices, diverse-owned brands, et cetera. So we give them the information and allow them to make the decision on what matters to them. I would say the only other place where I feel like we've gotten real clear customer feedback is the feedback that prompted us to set our animal welfare policy back in 2021 and exit fur as a business. We heard loud and clear from the customer that that was something that they wanted us to do, and we were very proud to be able to accomplish that.
I mean, it was me outside doing it, actually, probably about 15 years ago, but yes, I was among that. I'm very stoked about that. I'm going to ask a question that's kind of outside of what we had here, which Sarah's like, oh God, no. But y'all do a lot of these things. We all do kind of a lot of these things. During Climate Week especially, when you're on these panels, what's something you wish people would talk about? Like you wish people would mention? Because sometimes this can get very echo chambery, right? We all give a shit about sustainability. We do it for our jobs, we care about it. Well, what's something that you feel like is not talked about enough and needs to have a little bit of a platform or a forum here?
I think a really important thing that needs to be discussed is like the lack of funding for founders of color in climate tech. As one of them.
I was going to say it sounds personal, Kristy.
As one of them, I just think it's not talked about enough. There was a report, and I don't want to mess up the statistic, but it showed that there was a lot of women who got funding in climate tech last year, but it was all white women, not women of color. And I think it's a really important conversation that's not had enough about how many barriers to entry it is, yet these technologies are directly serving our communities. But yet we're not being given that same level of funding, mentorship, or support for our work. Green Jobs Board is currently funded through bootstrapping and loans, and we're very startup mode, and I'm proud of that. There's nothing I'm not saying, oh, woe is me for that or anything like that. I've been very picky and specific about wanting to build intentional relationships with potential VCs and funders because I want to make sure that they really believe in the vision of building a more diverse and inclusive climate space and build more diverse and inclusive markets related to decarbonization. And the only way you can do that, I believe, is investing in founders of color who directly understand the needs and the gaps and the barriers of other people of color. And so I just want to say that I just don't think discussions around barriers for funding and access and pipeline programs for people of color to thrive in entrepreneurship in this space is talked about enough. And I hope more people bring that up and ask their colleagues, are we really investing in minority and women founders? Are we opening doors for them? And if we're not, what are we doing if we're saying we have all these ESG corporate social responsibility reporting, but we're not actually putting our funding and our resources directly into that? I think you need to look at yourself for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being here and being that voice and sharing that. I couldn't agree more. I think a few other things that stand out for me in the conversation are just the real impacts, like zooming out from a lot of the policy change that we talk about or the technologies and just realizing we're experiencing the hottest months on record. There are communities, particularly of color, that are struggling with air quality and fear of taking their children outside. The very real impacts that we're feeling, sometimes I think we gloss over those and go straight to the solutions. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that the reason of why we're doing this work. Part of Climate Week is intended to give us inspiration and the energy to keep going throughout the year. So just want to acknowledge that. But I think some of the other things that I wish I heard more of during the week are some of the real challenges related to Scope 3 accounting in particular. I mean, it is the largest part of most companies' footprint, and companies are struggling to figure out how to accurately measure. And so how do we have granular, not high-level conversations, but really granular, for instance, on what it looks like for a multi-brand retailer like Neiman Marcus Group? We don't manufacture or design the goods that we sell, so we can't use supplier-specific emissions factors. So what do we do? How does a company like ours measure our Scope 3 emissions accurately? We want to do the right thing. So I think very granular conversations is what I wish we talked about more, or specific programs that everyone can really rally around and get involved in. The last example I'll give is last New York City Climate Week, we learned about a program called Supplier Leadership on climate transition, which is run by Guidehouse, and companies can join and basically enroll their top 40 suppliers each spring and fall in courses that are designed to advance their climate journeys. So whether that's measuring scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, setting SBTIs, implementing abatement plans, or disclosing to CDP. And so that's a very practical program that we learned about during Climate Week and joined as a result, and it's really helped us engage our suppliers in a new way. So I wish there were more practical examples like that moved us all forward.
I really appreciate what both of you put forward. I think for me, it's more, given, again, we're beyond incremental here. We have really important and quick goals that we have to achieve. We're talking about a lot that needs to get done in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's, I feel like it's more like, well, what's the action plan for when we leave? Because it's not about the people that I work with necessarily. But it's in my community. Like, how am I going to talk about this more in a way that's going to be meaningful to people that are not involved in the energy field, may not be focused on climate or sustainability? Like, how do I have those conversations in my community? Because I think one of the biggest barriers, kind of related to my response before, but bigger picture, is just we have to have community acceptance of the changes that we are going to make, and they're going to be changes that impact our entire economy and all of our infrastructure. And I don't know that communities are ready for that across the board. So I feel like all of us, we're on the front lines of a lot of conversations about policy, about technology, about management. But like at the end of the day, it's not about us. Like, we could do all we want, but we really need our friends, families, colleagues, customers to be on this journey with us. And I don't think we spend enough time in this setting, like really talking about how we're going to do that, because I think that's the next phase, is bringing more people in.
Bringing more people in and having, do you think some of this conversation around storytelling too? Because storytelling isn't
Yes.
just from the corporate.
But
it's
so
also
right,
to
we
the
could spend a
community
whole
members,
day,
to our family at Thanksgiving, every way that we talk about it.
But like, do it in like a workshop, right? Like, for everybody. Like, how does everybody kind of get trained on some strategies to take this outside of our world into other people's experiences? I don't feel like I'm equipped with all the tools, so I'm going to go check out all your feeds. But you know what I mean? Like, what are things that work?
Right.
To talk about this with people that are not familiar.
And we're seeing more of the need for that too, because it used to be companies would have an ESG team, full stop, and that was pretty revolutionary. But now we've got people who just do communications around ESG, because it's so nuanced. Different audiences require different kinds of things. They're interested in different kinds of channels and modes of communication. Let's see. I'm getting to wrap it up from my sister here. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody just one. I'm going to ask a question. Maybe we'll have time for Q&A. Maybe we won't. I don't want to seed a pipe dream here, but what makes you? Where are you guys getting your inspiration from as we move forward? Because again, we talked about some of the issues and the challenges, but we do need hope. We all work in this space. It can get a little bit. It can get dark, guys. It can get dark out here. So, what brings you hope? What partnerships, resources are inspiring you as you move forward to continue doing your important work?
Well, the new people coming into the field. I think, especially here at Climate Week or events that I go to outside of DC, it's just lots of people getting excited about it. Not enough, we need more, but that's what keeps me excited. It's just the freshness and then the enthusiasm and, understanding of the challenges, but still a very optimistic view. So that keeps me going.
Drawing a lot of inspiration from all of the conversations around policy and content creation and culture this year. We're hearing those emerge as themes more than any Climate Week I've attended in the past. But to your point about female founders, I'm personally drawing a lot of inspiration from all the women of color who I've seen show up on panels talking about that. So Samada Pattison at Solutions House yesterday was amazing, talking about and reminding, frankly, the audience that so many things that we consider sustainability are just the way of living in indigenous cultures, right? It's the right way to do things. And so I am just so appreciative that there are people who take the time to come and show up and be part of the conversation and educate us, because I think those reminders are so important, and there's a lot that we can learn from all cultures when it comes to this conversation.
Absolutely.
I would say what inspires me is definitely my team at Green Jobs Board. We're all young people under the age of 30 who are building a climate tech company, and we actually got invited to host our own event this year. On Friday, we're having the Green Jobs Pavilion, so it's our first ever full-scale event that we're planning and organizing ourselves. And I'm just really proud of the progress that us as young people just came together, and we were just like, we're just gonna do it, and we're just gonna build it. And we, built these curated panels about talking about burnout, climate pathfinding. We have panels with star-studded speakers with climate employers talking about how can they do a better job at recruitment, talking with job seekers about what are they looking for, and building an actual new community space of storytelling about the future of climate work. And for me, that's just really inspiring, because climate work and climate jobs are such this emergent, evolving field. And the fact that, I have the privilege and opportunity to be spearheading the storytelling and building community spaces around that really gives me a lot of hope for the future.
But trailblazing it too, so you should give yourself even more credit.
Thank you.
For sure. Let's give it up for our fabulous panel. Do we have time for Q&A? What do you think?
Maybe one or two questions, then we'll pass it back to Paul.
Okay, sounds good. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
So a few of you talked about change management, storytelling. So to get in the hearts and minds of my company, 7,000 people, half of them don't believe in climate change. How does one change that so we get action? Any advice?
Well, have you read the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath? Anybody? Can I get a show of hands? Yes. It's very good, and it talks about, I think change management should be a basic skill or course that every sustainability practitioner takes, but it talks about the importance of finding those early adopters and celebrating their successes, giving them recognition, and that's exactly what we've done at Neiman Marcus Group when we find examples of employees embedding our sustainability goals into their daily tasks wherever they are. We shine a light on that and we celebrate it, and it brings more people into the fold, and eventually you get this natural momentum, and it's something positive that people want to be a part of. And there's definitely an education element too. I mean, people may not want to get involved with what they don't understand, so I think that's the hard and dirty work, is really taking the time to educate people after you celebrate the success. But I don't know.
I would just say that it's important to, I don't know, maybe it's creating your own affinity group where people can be invited and you can just make it a bit more conversational. And it could just be I don't know if that exists within your company, where there are certain groups or even Slack channels or something like that you could create and just encourage people. Because at the end of the day, even if they don't believe in climate, they might have deep respect or mutual interest with their other coworkers. And if those people believe in climate, maybe there's a chance that you could build some affinity groups with allies and be like, hey, can you just come to this, you're my friend, you're my colleague, and approach it more in that way. And then try to create those conversations in a way that eases them into that. But yeah, it can be really difficult if people are really stubborn and not open-minded. But I like to believe there are some people in that space. There are at least some. So I think also the expectation, you're not going to get everyone, but maybe some people, and that might be enough.
Yeah, just, probably something you've explored, but broadening out the benefit conversation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to come about energy management, right? So, whatever stream of sustainability you're working on, just thinking about all the different co-benefits, and again, what it means to people, not what it means to institutions or just maybe to some, putting climate science aside. It is just a huge problem, right? And just hard to get your hands around. So if you can make it something more tangible to them, you may get them in, kind of meet them where they are, kind of thing, and and they may never believe in climate change. That's something that may be hard to do, but at least you can get them to understand what the benefits will be to them, and kind of and the why it matters. to your organization.
I was going to actually just say, too, I consult with a lot of companies as well on sustainability marketing and ESG stuff, and I find a lot of times broadening that conversation, like you said, but to the fiscal benefits on an organizational level can be an awesome gateway drug to get people to care about sustainability who might not otherwise. Not saying every sustainable move is going to be something that's going to reap dividends immediately that you're going to be able to see on a balance sheet, but a lot of times that's something that does get people on board, or if it saves time, or if it builds productivity. Those kinds of metrics are really important, I think, to kind of maybe in a less pressured way move people to become more advocates for sustainability over time without them feeling like they're getting, strong-armed at work, or without polarizing folks that you have to work with, which is tough. You can't change company culture immediately. So that's a good way sometimes to get folks on board. Good luck. Godspeed. All right, any other questions? Oh, hello, red tie. What's up?
So the question might be more for Lisa, but there might be some perspective that might be interesting from the other panelists. You talked about working in policy, and it's like set clear rules, then get out of the way and let people take action. When talking about climate action, there's so many different pieces to that are interactive and complex. What is your group doing to help make that simple and allow policymakers to set those very clear rules and then get out of the way? Because the landscape is nuanced, right? You've got rules in California that conflict with rules in other states. You've got federal rules that conflict with other local rules. There's refrigerant issues that also compound the action that people want to take that they can't do because the right codes aren't in place for them to adopt certain technologies. So I'm just kind of curious what strategies you're taking to try to help make that simpler so that those rules can be set in a more clear way so that folks can, accelerate the action that they can take. And I guess the perspective I'd be curious to hear from the other panels is, do you see that as a barrier to actually doing things in some of the markets that you work within because there's such unclarity or misunderstanding of what's going on that is a burden to being able to take that clear action? Right.
I mean, I think, all these different layers of policy making and decision making, there's no, I'm going to give you a simplified answer, right, with some examples, but a lot of energy decision making is done at the state level, and then as you said, it interacts with federal and local policies, and then you've got customer preferences. There's a whole host of things that are in the mix here. So in some cases we may try at the federal level, and again, then we maybe have international, as we're experiencing with climate disclosure. We've got Europe, we've got Japan, we've got other places where they're all working on this, and they're not necessarily doing it in the same way that if we could have a national program that may not look the same. So we have to also look beyond our borders as our country, but something like building codes, right? Something that is really important to kind of set the standard for a lot of different technology deployment. There's connections between the local, the state, and the federal, but there's an opportunity at the federal level, if not, in some cases we are setting standards, but we're also really trying to help facilitate capacity building and implementation and enforcement of codes, right? So if you can take it to the highest level, and if you can have a standardized approach, provided it has flexibility, because we're going to need a lot of flexibility if we're doing it anything at the national level is going to have to be implemented, I would hope, in a flexible way. But that's an example where we're trying to have some uniformity, but not so prescriptive that we don't allow innovation or we don't allow for future opportunity to improve. I think about regulations. On one other area we worked on other than the SEC is power plant regulations in the past year. We've been working on power plant regulations for, since the Clean Air Act. But in, the last 15 years, we've been focused more on climate change related. We always have been working on air quality, but now we're working more on climate. And there's this whole discussion about, well, would we be better off with a national standard, or should we have all these state and regional standards? And I think it's not always a clear answer. Again, it comes back to, having policies that are implementable and that can endure over time. But one strategy is looking for some commonality between states, and if we can do things at the federal level that can be implemented well, then that's worth trying for,
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good questions. Now, Paul, now is your time. Come on up.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking the panel. Awesome job today. Coming in hot. Ashlee at AOL.com.
No, I'm the little running man. Yeah.
Look, I really thought-provoking. I really appreciate the storytelling aspect, and actually, when you brought up that we need to take the focus of Climate Week conversation and start with people that need to be outside of the bubble of Climate Week and engage them, and that authenticity and imperfection is the way to do that, because that'll get us some credibility. Those are key messages that I would take away. You know, from Trane Technologies' point of view, we're all in on trying to decarbonize the built environment. I think the tangential benefits, the other things that you get for the climate deniers are clear. They're spaces people want to work on, they're efficient, they save you money, they're more investable than other assets. And so thinking about the holistic benefits that you get from doing it, as engineers, we're like, I don't have to talk about climate change to tell anyone that decarbonizing a building or a plant or a process is the right thing to do in a number of different directions. So we really appreciate that. We continue to drive the innovation engine that's behind that. You said, like, there's actually people that don't think about chillers a lot?
I mean, I don't know who they are, guys.
They're the ones who work with Trane. We think about chillers a lot.
Chillers all the time.
We think about a lot of other things, and we're innovating in that way. So I want to just thank you all for taking the time to listen to the panel, and hope that you have a great rest of the week here in New York. So thank you.
Thank you.